YouTube pards, Jack Spade here with you, High Noon Leatherworks, back for another leather adventure. Today, we're going to go ahead and dye the cell phone holster. So, last episode, we got all the stitching holes drilled, put all the saddle stitching in, sanded down the edges. Now we're ready to put some dye on it. So come on in, let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is put my protective gloves on. Again, this dye is not going to wash off your skin. It will wear off eventually, but I like to wear my protective gloves. Today we're using Fiebing's leather dye in tan. And make sure you always give it a good shake. And then I use these little trays, little tiny trays. I get a dozen of them for $1 at Dollar Tree. And I just throw them away. So using some tan dye today, I'm going to have to get me a paper towel. I always like to keep the excess wiped off of the bottle. And then I've got my dauber, my wool dauber. So let's daub just a small amount here, and let's do the edges first. They will, if you recall from the last episode, I sanded these edges down with some coarse sandpaper. Actually, it was emery cloth, but so that's going to make them real rough, where they'll soak up a lot of dye. And then I'm going to do the back, and it's unfinished because I wanted my finished piece to be inside where the cell phone goes. So the back is unfinished piece of the leather. In other words, it's the rough side, not the smooth side. I want to make sure I get the dye on there good where all my stitches are. And that tan dye is really making those stitches pop. I used the tan artificial sinew stitching. So that tan dye is really making that look good. I like to go over that pretty good all directions, since it is the rough side of the leather. I want to make sure I get every direction so that I don't miss a spot. Then I turn it over and do the finished side, or the outside. And again, it's going to be the same way. I'm going to want to make sure I get all around the stitching holes real good. And I'm going to have to put some more dye in my container. And if you've seen any of my dye videos, you know that I do not like to put dye back in my bottle when I'm done. I like, if I have any excess, I try not to, but if I do, I throw it away just because I don't want to contaminate the rest of my dye. So when you're dyeing, especially with these lighter colors, if you get any runs or anything like that, it's going to show up. So I always go over it once, kind of let that soak in a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to go over that again and really even that out or smooth that color out that's on there. And it's soaking it up pretty good. So I'll keep turning my dauber over, getting all that dye out of my dauber. And then I still have to do the inside. I have not done the inside. That would have been much easier to do if I had this apart. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do the inside a different color. So I'll set this aside. Give me another shallow dish. This one happens to be clear, not white. They're both basically the same thing. And looks like, I'm looking for black. Looks like I'm going to have to open a new black. And I've got a couple of them here. I always keep several blacks. And Fibings does come with a dauber. Now the thing is, you have to be super careful when you do this because you don't want to get any of that black on your tan. So black will cover tan, but tan's not going to cover black. So you can always go a little bit darker to help cover up something, but you can't go lighter. So get this protective skin off of here. You got to be very, very careful not to splash like I just did onto my arm. There's a black spot that's not going to go away anytime soon. Just a little speck of that hits your skin and it just spreads out. So put some black dye. You can see why I use the cardboard, because you get one little spill, and kind of the same way that it does on your skin, it wants to soak up in that cardboard so it spreads out. So I'll use the dauber that they sent with the new dye in the box, and what I'll do is I'll kind of open that up so I can get down in there. And I've got a finished side and I got a non-finished side down in there. So the finished side's not going to take near as much dye again as the non-finished side would take. And you want to be very careful not to get any of that on your tan on the outside. Now I am going to do the black on the edge also to give it a different look. I put so much on my dauber that it runs on the outside of my tan dye. So just enough to get it to soak into that edge, but not run down the side. You can see how that makes that look. That's going to make that tan really pop because of that black inside. So I'll continue again. Black's going to cover really well. Even on the rough part of the leather, black covers really well. And I can keep squeezing that, and that'll keep opening that up so I can get down in there a little bit further. Get all the way to the bottom. Just keep working my way until I have the whole thing covered. Again, it would have been really easy to have done that when that was all apart in pieces. I need a little more dye on the black. It's just almost impossible to pour that when they're new and not spill any. Make sure your cap's on good so you don't get any dry out. Make sure you didn't spill any on your gloves where you're going to grab. I still might not have put enough dye in there. We'll see. Again, the black does cover pretty good. So if you can get the dauber down in there, and what I may have to do is grab a hold of my flat needle nose pliers so I can get a really good grip on the dauber. Yeah, that'll extend my reach. That made a huge difference. So then what I can do is that amount of dye is going to make that a little pliable. So I want to make sure I didn't distort any of my molding, my wet molding. So we're in pretty good shape. This will end up drying out nice and light, and then you can see the inside is black. So we get a little two-tone effect there. So I will clean up this mess and I'll be back. The dye, the tan dye, well, and the black are still drying. These will kind of lighten up as it dries. You can see the lighter parts of it already, but you can see now what I was talking about on the stitching, how the stitching just pops with that tan dye on there and that tan stitching. So what I'm going to do, even though that's not completely dry, I'm going to take a microfiber cloth and I'm going to take some saddle soap and I'm going to get that on that microfiber cloth. I'm going to hit that edge where I sanded that down, and I'm just trying to hit the edge itself. I don't want it on the front where I dyed it. Get a little more. And rubbing that saddle soap into that edge. And then once I've got it good and coated, I'll come back with my burnishing tool, this wooden burnishing tool, and I'm going to take the wide part. You can see it has different thicknesses or widths depending on how wide your leather is, but I'll take the wide part and I'm going to come back and I'm going to burnish that. And that will kind of give that a rounded edge instead of a squared off edge where I sanded it down. So it will give, and it'll give it a finished edge look. I'll do the corners, do the bottom, and then do the other side. And that saddle soap really softens that leather up and makes it pliable, so that when I use that burnishing tool, let me open this up a little bit. Then I use that burnishing tool, and what that does is it rolls those edges. See how it kind of made it shiny? Well, it also rolls those edges. So it gives it a real nice finished look. Alright, so we have our cell phone holster dyed, and we've got the edges finished on it. When we come back next episode, we'll go ahead and finish this project up. So come on back next time to check it out, the completion of the cell phone holster. And as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.